The Real Estate Photography Podcast is brought to you by tourbuzz.net, high-definition virtual tour and photograph hosting, now with interactive floor plans. Sign up for your free trial today. Hello and welcome to the Real Estate Photography Podcast. Today we have an interview with Thomas Guba. Hey Thomas, how's it going?
Good. Yourself, Mike?
I am pretty good. It is, again, a Friday afternoon that we're talking. It continues to work well with our schedules, right?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So, Thomas, last time you were on, we were talking about contracts, contract negotiations, and everything associated under the sun with contracts. And I actually wanted to now back up, and we're going to get just a really good idea of who you are as a photographer, your business, how you got into real estate photography, and then kind of walk us through some of the photos you have on your website.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, so let's start.
All right.
Who are you? No.
I'm still trying to answer that question.
I
Mike.
know. A lot of therapy, right?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting tangent. I actually have a degree in therapy.
No way.
Yep. I have a master's in marriage family therapy.
Well, go on about that. How did you transition from family therapy to real estate photography?
Well, it's kind of a sordid story, but after I graduated, well, we can just get into this is how I started out, and please interrupt me if you need to. I can I can be very long-winded when talking about myself. So,
Okay.
not as much as some people I know, but pretty long-winded. So, so yeah, I had graduated from a program here in California with my master's in marriage family therapy, and at the time, sort of a few life-changing events happened, and I realized that, of course, after getting my degree, that wasn't exactly where I wanted to go at that time. So I took a job, believe it or not, with a financial advisor.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wanted a job where the program I was in was very introspective. So I wanted a job that I could go to and just do and come home at the end of the day and not think about it. So I was working for this financial advisor, and she had a home office. And one day at lunch, her husband was there reading a book on photography, on how to make better photos.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have to back up here. I actually have a technical degree in photography from a program similar to like Brooks or Rochester Institute of Technology. You know, the whole thing, 4x5s, bronze colors, zone systems, spot plane metering decks,
Okay.
chrome, all of it. So,
And this
very,
was, just to put it into a timeline, this was before your...
Oh yeah, I graduated in '92 with that degree, and then I graduated 10 years later, 2002, with a marriage family therapy degree. So I had assisted a number of commercial shooters when I lived in Tucson, and at that point I was trying to be an artist. I mean, I guess I was an artist, but I was trying to make it as an artist, and,
Mm-hmm.
and we all know how that goes. So I was waiting tables, doing shows and assisting photographers. So I have a technical degree and did it for years and years. I think I started photography in '88 and then gave it up in about '97 to pursue the therapy degree. Gave it up entirely, sold my darkroom, sold all my camera equipment, packed all my negs away, and moved to California to do that. So got my degree, and we fast forward. So here's this guy reading this photography book at lunch, and I said, hey, his name is David. I said, hey, David, if you need any tips on photography, in a former life I was a photographer, just let me know. And he was like, oh, that'd be great. I'd love to have you teach me how to do photography. I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, I'll pay you the same thing my wife is paying you. I'm like, better yet. This is great. So we went out once, and he had a little, Canon point and shoot. I don't know what it was back then in 2002. So I explained to him about aperture, shutter speed relationship, and, at that point I was more familiar with, film types and the color temperature of film types, not necessarily white balance, but it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And explaining to him about white balance and the color temps of all the lights, like your ambience at 38 or 3700, your flash is at 56, going to get these weird shifts in there. So we're going through it and how to do a decent composition. But, it wasn't really lighting because all it had was that little crappy, flash on the front of it.
Hmm.
Um, so we did that a couple times, and he's like, "Oh, this is great. This is exactly what I wanted, because I want to take better photos for my real estate listings." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, great, whatever." Um, and then he's like, "All right, I got another really big one coming up. I want you to come out and show me what to do on that one." I'm like, "Sure, no problem." And so I show up, and this should have been the big. We should have paid attention at this point. So I pull up in my beat up old Forerunner, and just a jeans and a t-shirt, and I pull up to this house, and there's all these Mercedes and Jaguars and BMWs in front, and people walking around in suits, and it's this huge multi-million-dollar property. And I walk in, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, did you see the 4 million down the road at blah 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 blah?" I am so out of my element at this point. I had no, there's a sushi spread for the broker tour, and I walk up, and I'm like, "David, weren't we supposed to do a photo shoot, or me to teach you?" He's like, "Yeah, well, I forgot I had broker tour." Like anyone forgets they have broker tour.
I know,
He's like,
I know.
he's like, "Here's the camera. You shoot it for me." I'm like, "Okay." I'm like, I'm sitting there thinking I've done architectural shoots. I'm used to using a Cinar with hot lights and taking 2.5 hours to light a kitchen, and I got this crappy Canon point and shoot that can't do anything. But okay, whatever, So I'm walking around, snapping photos, and trying to get interesting comps and everything. And at the end, and he's like, "And I'll pay you what I was going to pay you to, teach me." I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I hand him the camera at the end, and a day and a half later, I get a call from him, and he says, "Oh my God, the photos that you did were so amazing. They're so much better than anything that I could ever do. And, thanks for doing it." I'm like, "Sure, no problem, and let's, if you want, schedule another teaching session." And then about a month later, I got another call from him, and he said, "You know what, Thomas, the real estate agency that I'm working for is thinking about hiring a professional photographer. Do you think that you can do it?" And I thought, well, I'm not doing anything else with my life now. I may as well give this a shot, And so I borrowed some money from my folks, and I hope this doesn't go out to the rest of the world, haha, but got a free copy of Photoshop 6 at the time. And I went and researched cameras and got the least expensive point and shoot that you could get that had the widest lens, a hot shoe, and a PC port, because that's what I needed. At that point, I wasn't familiar with like the Nikon CLS or, at this point, the optical slaves and all of that. And I didn't have any money at that point. And so I went through my old gear. I had a couple leftover flashes. And so what I did was I took one of my PC sync cords, like a 2-foot PC sync cord, and I cut that in half and spliced it into a 100-foot spool of speaker wire, so that I could plug that into the PC port and hide the wire underneath the rugs and run it around the room for my secondary flash, and then I had one on camera.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and at that point, I had never worked digitally. I knew nothing about the digital world. I had beta tested Photoshop, the first Photoshop, when I was in school back in '92, but from that point forward, I hadn't used it at all. Luckily, I was familiar enough with all the technical background that I had, but that's how I started out. I had no idea what I was doing. Larry didn't exist at that point. Flickr didn't exist at that point. I didn't know anyone to turn to, and on top of it, I was used to doing high-end architectural shoots, not this real estate stuff. But I got it to work, and I actually beat out an architectural photographer to get the job because the agent's complaint was that he took too long to do it and didn't give enough deliverables. I think his work ultimately was better than mine, and he wasn't the most personable person either. But I was all gung-ho, it's like, oh, this is great, I'm going to be making some good money and doing photography and I've never done this. And so I just jumped into it and started experimenting and, oh, what if I do this and what if I do that? And that's how it all started. And then I got the contract, and then I was pretty much working, at that point. Well, it started a little slow, but within the first 8 months, then I was doing it full time. And the great thing about it too was that even though, I mean, there's a few photos that I have from that time period, and they're pretty much all ambient photos that I would keep in my portfolio, but the majority of it's just complete schlock. I mean, I look back at it and I'm like, I can't believe those people paid me to do this.
I know exactly what you mean.
Right, but it was so much better than what the agents could do because I had all that knowledge, and the comps were so much better. I remember taking one photo of a basement, and I showed it to the agent on the back of the camera, and she's like, "Where's that?" I'm like, that's the basement downstairs. She's like, "No, it isn't." Yeah, it is. Let's go take a look together. And she's like, "Oh my God, like you just totally transformed that. It doesn't look like that." I'm like, "Well, we're in advertising, right?" And she's like, "Well, I'm not saying I don't want it. I'm just saying that it's in the basement of this house."
Oh man.
And so it was great because every day was on the job training. I started with knowing nothing about what I'm doing. And as I got better, the agent's sophistication at viewing images got better, and we kind of grew together along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I kind of say, at this point, boy, if I was starting out where I was before, competing against me now, forget it. I'd never get the job.
Probably wouldn't work out the same way.
Not at all. So
I was going to say, it's kind of, that's really neat how I would almost say that this huge opportunity was presented to you, and I mean, you did eventually seek it out. There was a point where you actually had to make this cognitive decision to say, okay, I'm going to go for this, but it sounds like a lot of this was purely by coincidence.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you said, I made the choice to, pursue it when it did present itself. But, and the way I do it, and this is even more interesting. It was probably 2 weeks ago. I shot that guy, David, the real estate agent, his house. He's going to be moving to Davis. So it was really interesting to go back, and we were sitting there at the breakfast nook, which used to be the dining room where I met him. I'm like, well, this is where it all started, David. He's like, yep, it sure is, isn't it? Just pretty fascinating.
Oh, wow.
But I just jumped on it, and that was that. I think in a way, though, I was pretty naive. I mean, I certainly would do things a lot differently, which I can talk about if you want.
Yeah, go on. Tell us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't know any better, and so the amount that they were paying me at the time was like, oh, this is great, which I would ask for more than I did now because, that typical statement, again, kind of referring back to the, PFRE Flickr site, when people ask, how much do I charge? The response more often than not is just don't lowball yourself in the beginning. Because to raise your rates is going to be really, really hard once people get used to it. And and I definitely lowballed myself in the beginning, but the field didn't exist. I mean, and then I was thinking about this today. I mean, I pretty much got in at the ground floor. I mean, real estate photography was just starting in 2004. I mean, it outside of that, people would go and hire an architectural photographer for a high-end shoot or shoot it themselves. This business really didn't exist. So, I mean, as I said, there was no one to really turn to. But, rates would be one of it. And we talked about the insane time frame for deliverables. I mean, if I knew what I knew, I would never agree to next day by 9. I mean, that's just the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life.
And I think you mentioned that you still have that as your deadline.
I can't get rid of it. I mean, that's what people expect, and they have their 10 o'clock deadline to get flyers done, and that's what they've been used to for, we're going on 6 years now. Actually, it was 6 years last month.
No, go on, sorry.
Yeah, things like that are just really difficult to change. Number of deliverables being a set number that you never go over. That, rates, delivery, deliverables, and scheduling too. People got really used to calling me up the day before saying, hey, come out tomorrow, or calling me and saying, and this is different because of the contract work, but calling me and saying, hey, I have a shoot that's coming up. Can you tentatively put me on the books? And whereas I need an order to go through the system, and then I'd never see the order, so I ended up tracking them down. It's almost like I became their PA to get them to do what they should have done in the first place, because I was dumb enough to tentatively set an appointment. Luckily I put the kibosh on that probably 3 years ago, where it's like, don't call me to schedule an appointment. Just, you know what to do. It's really easy. So those are some of the things that I would have changed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
I was going to say that I don't think anybody who's been in business for multiple years would ever look back at their very beginning and say, that's exactly how I do it now. And I'm so happy that yeah. So,
yeah, you're
but
right.
but it makes sense that these tweaks, sounds like anyway, they happened over time. They're small, and you've had a little bit of an uphill battle with some of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. At this point, the deliverable or delivery time is the one that is really kind of killing me. So that's I mean, I do it differently for my independent clients now, and let them know it's next day, 24 hours or next day by noon if I can do it. Unfortunately, generally I always have a 10 o'clock shoot, so I have to have stuff done to walk out the door. But if I have the time, people are more willing to work with me on that one.
Oh, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, hey, speaking of your business, what's the size of your business? Because last time we spoke, you mentioned that you might have other people help you. I'm forgetting the phrasing here, but other people might cover different shoots, blah, blah, blah. But how large or how small is your operation?
In terms of number of shoots per month, or
number employees, who works for you besides yourself? And I say that, I guess I'm phrasing it this way, because most photographers are independently employed and they're by themselves.
Right.
Now, it sounded like you have some other go-to people that are there on a consistent basis.
Well, it's I guess pretty consistent. The way that it worked was I had the contract with one of the counties out here, with Alameda County. And then for some reason or another, which I don't know and really don't want to know, they needed to fire the photographer that handles the adjacent county, Contra Costa County. So the marketing coordinator at Pac Union called me and said, we're in a bind, we need to fire so-and-so. Can you cover Contra Costa? And at that point, I wasn't quite getting enough work from Alameda, although I am now, but I wasn't at that point, and I said, you know what, just give me Contra Costa. And she's like, it's yours, take it. And from that point forward, and again, this is one of those things you look back and you're like, why did I do that?
Yeah.
So I think I went from about 2 or 3 shoots a day to, when I pulled in Contra Costa, then I was up to like 6 or 7 a day, like immediately.
Oh, man.
I know. And I don't know how I did it. I look back and I'm like, I really don't know how I made it through that time period. But what I told her was that, okay, give me Contra Costa, but we're going to need someone else to cover because I can't physically do it all, for an extended period of time. And she's like, fine, just hire someone and we'll, at first they tried to do it with me, and that was a complete disaster because they didn't know what they were looking for. And they're in the city too, so they were pulling people in from San Francisco, which just wasn't going to work. So from the very beginning, I've been looking for good talent. Of course, that's changed over time as to what I'm looking for in a candidate. So at first it was like, oh, my friends can do it, and I tried that, and that was a disaster. And then, people who kind of thought they were photographers but wanted to get in the business, which I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but the way that I was handling it at the point wasn't all that great. So I tried that one, and it kind of failed and fell on itself too. So over the course of time, I don't have employees. I have independent contractors.
Okay.
And I'm not incorporated. I'm a sole proprietorship myself, because I don't want to be incorporated. It's kind of a big business thing I don't want to do with all the ins and outs of it. I don't want employees. I don't want to have to worry about benefits. And then on top of it, this kind of job fits perfectly with ICs because people need to have their own equipment and pretty much work out of their own house. So it's not like people are coming to my house to, borrow my equipment or, work on my machines or anything along those lines.
Gotcha.
So I have trained and hired 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sorry, I'm thinking through all the people. 7.
Do you need help with your numbers? I can. 7 is next. No.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And I was trying to think who was number 7.
I got you.
Thank you.
Just kidding.
No, 6, 8. That was the twins. So yeah, 7 people.
Okay.
At this point, I've had as ICs. Right now, I have 2, and I think 2 is generally a pretty good number.
Manageable.
Yeah, manageable, and that gives me and them enough flexibility. If I have too many people, and I'm actually working with another individual at this point too, but that's kind of for another project, which I don't know, maybe we can do the where are we going from here at the end or something. But 2 seems to be good because I don't have enough work to employ someone full time. So I can't reasonably request someone to have their schedule fully free for the work that I send their way. It's just not fair, really, and I wouldn't be giving them enough income. So this way, with 2 people, I can, if someone else has another job of their own that they have going on, I can call the other person and hopefully they're available. And if that doesn't happen, well, then I have to, bear down and actually do the shoot myself. So I do end up taking shoots that I wouldn't want to take. But 2 seems to be a pretty good number.
Okay.
So yeah. So that's how big we are, and I keep them. I throw. One's closer than the other, so it's easier for me to give her work. But I probably give her, I don't know, average about 5 or 6 shoots a week, let's say, on average.
Okay.
The other guy, 2 to 3 shoots a week. And then I'm still working in the transition of trying to back off a little bit. But I'm still pulling, I don't know, say, on average, probably 18 a week, roughly.
Okay. So you're fairly busy.
Yeah, let's say that. Yeah. Yeah, it was actually a nice excuse to do this podcast. I told people I have a very important meeting that I have to go to. I can't shoot at 2 o'clock on Friday, so.
Oh, I am flattered.
Thank you.
No problem. It took us about a month and a half to schedule this, right?
Yes, it did. It did.
Yeah, and we should let everybody know this is the spring rush, and everyone who's listening to this, you're probably in this. You're in the same field, so you understand. It is the spring rush right now. Well, it was the spring rush, and now it should have backed off. But for you, Thomas, you had just said it hasn't really slowed down for you.
No, it hasn't. It's certainly not last June, that's for sure. Well, I mean, the economy was, starting to do really bad then too. But no, and I think it might be that a lot of people pushed off listings till this year to wait and see what happened. Because, for example, normally January is just pretty slow, and that's when I went to Australia to go teach. I thought, this will be a perfect time for Patty to pick up the work from me. And normally I have 25 billables in January or something like that. We ended the month with 60.
Whoa.
Yeah. Crazy. I know. It was real fun managing all that from Australia.
Of course. I can't understand why you wouldn't want to do that.
No.
All right. So now we know what kind of size your business is, but how do you keep it afloat? And I think we already answered this question since we've talked about contracts. But what kind of marketing do you or don't you do?
Well, again, I feel really fortunate, not only because, it was, that sort of, shall we call it the coincidence with David that happened, and because I have the contract work, I'm not the best person to talk about marketing with, because I really don't have to do any. A lot of it's word of mouth, and People, there's often that question, how do you get your foot in the door? And I don't have a really good answer for that for most folks. But what I do know is that visibility is 80% of the marketing. I don't know how you experience it, Mike, but word of mouth. I get more independent jobs by running into other agents at broker tour than any other way. I don't think any direct mailing could ever have as much impact as a broker at tour seeing me or whoever, with my, whatever camera I'm using at that point, with, the 5 flashes and tripods that I have out, running around, shooting around people, all these flashes in multiple rooms are going off. And it's kind of silly in a way, although I've talked about this with, a number of photographers that, and I shoot Nikon, so whatever the Canon equivalents would be, there's a big difference between shooting with like a D70 and then having a D3S on your back. I mean, people take a look at that camera and they're like, oh my God,
Yeah, the public perception is
exactly.
The bigger the better.
Right. I mean, it is a way better camera. And there is a justification to having a certain camera because of what they can do. But, in a way, and I'm not telling people to go out and buy a D3S and you'll get work from it. However,
no, you have to be seen using it. No,
you have to
holding
be seen using it. Exactly. So, so in terms of marketing, it's word of mouth, and being visible, being very visible, and being nice to people. In the beginning when I didn't have enough work, I would always have my business cards out right next to my camera bag in case someone would ask me, do you have a card? And rather than me going, yes, let me go get it for you, it'd be like, yes, I'm Thomas, nice to meet you. There's business cards right next to my camera bag. Please feel free to grab one on the way out. And that way I was, marketing as I went along. Now when people ask me, with the kind of the place that I'm at, it's like, well, I kind of know you through word of mouth, so I don't know if I want to work for you. No, I forgot those today. So I'm much more selective now, which you can do after a certain amount of time, about the independent clients that I take, the projects that I take on, the expectations that I give clients. So it's very different than it was 6 years ago.
Right. And now you mentioned prior to when we hit the record button that sometimes people will ask you, hey, do you have a Thursday at 4 o'clock? And you will say, no, I don't. There's just no way you can be in 2 places at once. Does that happen a lot more recently? Or
No, it happens the same amount that it always does. And I'm sure you experienced it with the contract work too. Agencies are full of personalities, and there's some agents that, and this is how they run their business, they know exactly what's going on. They know the time frame, when the painter's going to be done, when the staging is going to be done, when the window washers are going to be there. And I have some people book me out a month and a half in advance, and I just bow down to those people. I'm like, thank you. You get the Agent Gold Star Award,
Yep.
But it's always the same people that do that because they have their business together, and that's how they run it. And then there's the class of characters who are always the same people as well that give me 1 or 2 days notice for a photo shoot consistently, and some of them get upset when I can't do it. But I kind of look at them and go, remember that email I sent out 2 years ago that said I need at least a week to do this? Did you read it? Did you take a look at it? Did you delete it? But the folks that do that as well are also the people that, for lack of a better word, aren't that particular about the photography. So I can send Patty or I can send Dale out to shoot for them, and they're perfectly fine with it. And usually those two are available, 2 or 3 days out, where I'm not. So that's kind of how I handled that one. And again, it's usually the same, cast of characters that's doing it. I mean, sometimes it is a higher-end agent, and I'll just say, you know what? Love to be able to do it for you. I can send Patty or Dale. I can send you links to their website so you can take a look at their work, Or if not, then I have next Tuesday at 4 available, and I can do it for you then. And I just leave it up to them to decide what they want to do on that.
I was going to say, in the same situation, 9 out of 10 times, I'll just move my schedule around and wait for you to become available.
Yeah, a lot of times that does happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And generally, though, I get pinched when that happens, too, because will be a bigger property. I don't really have the time to shoot it. I know I'm going to, pretty much push and kill myself to get it done. So I will do it. I mean, that's part of the business is, making your customers happy. But it isn't all that fun, really. No. I mean, and that's the one benefit, we talked about in the contract work of having independent clients. I mean, of course you want to bend over backwards for everybody and keep your clients. But I think that folks have a little bit more flexibility of saying, yeah, no, I can't do it, than I do. I'm kind of obligated to make it work for people. The benefit is I have much more, steady, consistent work as well. So.
Right. And the other thing to remember, too, I mean, for me anyway, the one time, or I should say the first time somebody says within 1 day advance, I need you to be here, blah, 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 and you say, I'm sorry, I can't make it happen. And then, you work through that one, you figure out how to make it work. The next time, I'm given typically much, much more notice. And I think the agent who's asking has learned how to better manage the request, from the first time. So sometimes there has to be a little bit of a learning experience.
Yeah, it's true. Although I've also, conversely experienced it where if I do bend over backwards and jam it in, they're going to do the same thing and expect me to bend over backwards and jam it in too.
Oh, so. No, I meant, I didn't mean that you bend over and you make it work for them. I mean, you might make it work a day later or at a slightly different time. It doesn't work perfectly for them, and then next time the things roll around, they'll be thinking a little bit more in advance.
Yeah, but I think it's important to mention that to the client as well. What I do these days is if I can fit it in, even if it is 1 day, I'll say something along the lines of, Agent X, I can accommodate it, but just to let you know, this is really, really short notice for me, and in the future, I'm going to need more time. Mm-hmm. And that, I mean, you want to plant the seed a little bit too, so that they do start to get, oh, wow, I need to do this. I found that the most effective rather than, just, pushing them off a day and not saying anything about it.
Oh, yeah, definitely mention it. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to your workflow. So we're talking about business, but I want to move on to, all right, so the camera's in your hands. And it's a magic camera because your pictures are nice, right?
Exactly.
All right, but in all seriousness, tell about your workflow from shoot to post. From the moment you arrive on the scene of, just say, a regular old house, till when you pack up, go home, work on the post, and deliver the files. And go.
Okay. And jump in if you have any specific questions as I go along, too.
Sure thing.
I don't want to be just completely rambling here. So walk into a house, and the first thing I'm doing as I'm walking up, well, believe it or not, this is really, really silly. When I'm parking my car outside of the house, I take a look at it and figure out where not to park my car so that I'm not in the living room shot.
Same thing. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yep.
And that's one of those things you just learn over time, because I've done it a number of times and I'm doing the living room shot. I'm like, damn, I need to go move my car again.
It is so frustrating. I drive a bright yellow SUV too, so it's imperative. It's imperative that it can't be in the shot. Yeah. Sorry, I've interrupted already. Go on.
That's great. I'm sure people like to hear your voice too. So yeah, that's the first thing. Or is the agent car in the way, or what's going to be in the way of the exterior shot, both from the view out the window and towards the front of the house. So, and then I'm assessing what's going to be the best shot for the exterior as I'm pulling up. What are the hazards, and do I need to do it now? Excuse me. Because of the sunlight, or can I wait a little bit? Is it going to be better in 20 minutes, worse in 20 minutes? So already I'm assessing, the scene right then and there. grab the gear out of the car, walk in, and as I'm walking in the door, I'm starting to assess the shots. What does the living room look like? What does the dining room look like? And this is just my own quirk, but it really works for me, is I always shoot the kitchen last. I don't know why, but I do. So I walk into the kitchen and dump all my gear in the kitchen, and I think part of it is because under most circumstances, that's the room you're going to view the least, except for the bedrooms, from adjacent rooms.
Okay.
So I dump my gear in the kitchen, and then I walk around and start to turn on lights. Now, this is one of the things that we talked about, or I talked about when we were doing the workshops a while ago last year, is when you walk around and turn on the lights, what you're doing is you're viewing the property from almost every vantage point that you can. You want to be assessing the scene going, and even to take it to, I was going to say, looking at what comps are going to work out. But even more so than that, I'm doing the same thing where I'm assessing, where's the light at right now? Is it going to change? Is something really, really hard and I need to do it immediately? Because in 20 minutes, if I don't do it, it's going to kill me to try and shoot this. And so if I turn on this light, I'm looking at it from this angle of the living room. If I go turn on the other light, I'm looking at it from the other angle. Is that comp going to work? Is it even worth thinking about or worth trying to light? Because it may or may not. So I'm pretty much walking every corner of every room as I go through, assessing the difficult parts, the easy parts, how many lights I'm going to need to pull out, how many potential shots I'm going to get out of it. What is the color looking like in the place? Skylights can be a big problem, or they can be a big boon, depending on the time of day. And then I'll go and just take a really quick look at the backyard and see what I'm dealing with out there as well. So got all the lights on, and then I pull out as many strobes as I think I'm going to use for that particular shoot. Typically I pull out 3. If I pull out 5 these days, I'm kind of amazed. I mean, back in the day, I'd pull out 9 sometimes. But I've gotten to the point where I don't really need to do that anymore. And, we can talk about that, in a little bit, why I don't do that as much anymore. And then I start in the bedrooms. I start with the easiest bedroom first, and I go in through and I knock out all the bedrooms. And generally, knocking out the bedrooms, once you got the lighting system down, unless there's something a little funky in a bedroom, they're pretty much a box, I mean, I literally can do a bedroom in 30 seconds.
Right.
I mean, it's, just get them out of the way, because I don't know what I'm going to run into later, and I don't want to start with the most difficult shot and 25 minutes later be struggling on that, and then realize I have some other stuff, the bedrooms that I need to do, and then blow through what would be an easy shot and blow through it and make those look like crap. I'd rather get the easy stuff out of the way first. So, and it's also kind of like warm up to the property. I'm getting used to it. I'm feeling it out. And it seems kind of weird, but every property has its own personality and challenges. And
Oh, yeah. I totally agree.
yeah, so do all the bedrooms. And this is my weird thing too, do the master bedroom and master bath last, because they tend to be the most technically challenging. And then if the light isn't causing me any trouble, then I'll just do living room, couple living room shots, couple dining room shots, dining room to kitchen, kitchen shots, and then go to the front and the back and pack up, and there we go. So settings for me, there's a lot of debate about this, and I think both camps have certain validity to it. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it.
RAW versus JPEG.
But I should exactly right. Good call there. So I shoot everything JPEG, unless it's going to be a portfolio piece, and I know it's going to be a portfolio piece. Then I'll shoot RAW and JPEG, because for me, go ahead.
I was going to say, talk about that for a half a second. Recognizing, because I have the similar thoughts. We haven't even talked about this before. When you see something and this will be in my portfolio, what is it that you see, and how do you approach that differently?
Well, at this point, it needs to be something pretty extraordinary. Back in the beginning, there's some don't get me wrong, there's some pretty good shots on my website, but most of that stuff is, man, it must be from 4 years ago. I haven't updated that in forever. And that's part of, back in our last conversation, the non-marketing. It's like, well, I eventually want to redesign my website, but at this point, I don't need it for marketing purposes. It's more for agents to show their clients, to show my work, if they want to hire me. Um, and so there are some pretty good shots that I probably would keep in my portfolio, but it needs to be something super extraordinary. And that would be, at this point, generally, something that's going to be architecturally redeeming. I mean, I've shot like, how many? I think I worked it out a little while ago, and I think I've shot close to, at this point, 4,000 houses. I mean, a kitchen shot at this point is a kitchen shot.
Right.
It could be lit. It could be lit perfectly, nailed to the T without a flaw. But if there isn't something interesting about it, I'm not going to put it in my portfolio anymore because I have 800 of those. So I shot a loft the other day. This is the coolest place I have shot in a long time. It was a 2,500 square foot loft, and the woman had taken an old tire plant factory, bought the thing, totally gutted it, and redesigned it herself. She has an indoor swimming pool where the garage door used to be that goes up into the backyard, and then there's a glass wall that you can see the swimming pool from the living room. I had never seen anything like this before, and I love contemporary stuff. I absolutely love it. And so that one, you better believe I shot everything raw. Because it's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I haven't seen anything like this in a really long time. The angles that I can choose are untypical from what I would normally do. The lighting was perfect. I mean, I think I used 2 flashes at most on this place because they had these great skylights, perfect time of day. It was super easy to shoot. Just nice and balanced across the plane. So anymore, it really needs to be something that is very unique, very different, yet that stands out in some way that isn't your typical, whatever beautiful granite kitchen. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But I'm just,
There's just
why would I
100.
do?
There's just 100 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. So that's how I judge portfolio material at this point.
Gotcha.
So I would think that it's a good idea for people to understand how, the difference between how JPEG and RAW works in their camera and what situations might work better for one or the other. The advantage of RAW is that, well, except for being non-destructive, which I don't fully believe anyways, but is that it's pretty a neutral bias. You need to kind of go in and make all of those changes. Where with a JPEG, it's being interpreted, and in a lot of ways, I like the way that Nikon interprets the JPEG. So a lot of times I look at a straight RAW file versus a straight JPEG file, and I like the JPEG file way more than I like the RAW file. And this is also just proprietary. On some of the older Nikons, the noise in those RAW files was horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. I don't think Canon had nearly the problem that Nikon did. So for me, and this is where, the workflow, for me to go in and tweak that RAW file to make it look like the JPEG that I got out of my camera when I'm doing 5 shoots a day makes absolutely no sense to me, because the agents are going to dumb these down anyways. I mean, they're barely using the 12.1 JPEG file that I need to reconvert this thing back into in the back end. For them to go and take it to a crappy printer and turn it into garbage anyway.
So you're saying it's not practical?
It is not practical. Okay. No, I don't think so. It is if you have a really, really good workflow. And I'm not saying that people don't. But, and again, me and maybe you are in a very sort of unique situation where, with the amount of properties that I'm shooting per day, with the turnaround time, every step that I throw in to that takes even, like, let's say, 30 to 45 seconds per image. So you multiply that by, at a minimum, I'm editing 60 photos in the morning before I need to go and do my shoots. So you've just tacked on, a good half hour, let's say, to the overall processing time of those shoots during the day when I don't see a whole lot of advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you need to rescue something, and, obviously the dynamic range of a RAW file is way better than a JPEG. There's no question about that. If I need to rescue an exterior because of a certain time of day, now I'll shoot that RAW because I get 2 stops of highlight and shadow recovery out of my 700 that I wouldn't have in a JPEG file. Now that's really important to know, and know when you would use one or the other. But for all concerned practical purposes, I'm not rescuing 2 stops in any interior that I do. I'll light it or, do an exposure blend to get that to where I need it to be.
I hear everything you're saying, and this is interesting because we are in different camps on this one, and that's bad because we're not. This is not at war. I think it's a personal preference as to what you're doing with it and what do you mind doing.
Sure.
For me, I don't mind dealing with a little bit of extra time that it takes for, and now it's Lightroom 3, which handles them very quickly. I'm very impressed.
Oh, it's awesome, isn't it?
I know.
Anyone who hasn't got Lightroom 3 or CS5 at this point, content aware kind of sucks. It's okay, but it's not the magic bullet. What is the magic bullet is the new RAW and the new RAW converter.
Yes.
That thing, the 2006, it's worth it for that right there. It turned old files of mine into nice looking stuff.
Yes, it does. It's not smoke and mirrors. There really is a new processing engine behind it.
Huge difference. So,
but
anyways,
what I was saying is that
so for you, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say I do shoot everything in RAW. Now that being said, people will look at me like I have 5 heads when this is different when I go to a wedding and I shoot 3,500, 3,700 photos all in RAW, and they look at me and they go, "What are you doing? You're insane." And I fill up every memory card I have, and then I load them all onto the Drobo, and I go through every single one of them. And they go, "You're insane. You might as well just shoot them all in JPEG." And I'm like, "No, it's just the way I operate. I like to know that I have every bit of detail from every single shot, and I have the full amount of correction." And I guess maybe that's a defensive move, but I just like knowing that it has not been compressed and it hasn't been processed without me telling it to. Personal preference.
I would do this. No, I would do the same thing. If I was shooting weddings, you better believe I would shoot RAW. And for all my fine art work, I shoot RAW. I only shoot the JPEGs for interiors because I know on the back of the camera what I'm seeing and what I'm going to get out of it. So to have an extra step and actually the extra data on the card, for me, at least with the real estate stuff, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to consistently shoot RAW. I mean, again, if you need to, and again, there is no right answer on this one. And yeah, from my standpoint, and on top of it, with my 16 gig card, if I shoot JPEGs, I can get 1,700 images off of that 16 gig card. Whereas if I was shooting RAW, I think I can get 400 out of it or something like that. So, believe it or not, it's a practical decision. Strictly practical. So.
Yeah, I say whatever works for you.
Yeah.
And I'm
That's
right.
it.
And I'm
That's
right.
it.
Yeah.
Of course you are. Well, you're the interviewer. You are right.
Oh,
Mike.
right. I'm just messing with you. All right.
I can't wait to hear people listening to the podcast going, "God, why are they even talking about that?"
I know. We've alienated all of our niche audience as it is already, so,
Right. I'm just fast forward through that. So anyway, so I again pretty much JPEGs, and then come home, import through Bridge, which I find a lot easier than importing through Lightroom. Lightroom's just slower on that. And then separate all of the shoots into separate folders, and then go back and re-import everything into Lightroom from those folders. I like using Lightroom as as both a viewer and kind of a rough edit
Hmm.
before I go to Photoshop. Especially these days now that, well, it was before, but both Enfuse and Photomatix being Lightroom plugins.
Yep.
Um, so I can do my tweaks in there, and if I'm going to do a blend, um, then I can just, send it through Lightroom, but I have it open up the blend in Photoshop. So I have Photoshop open in the background, doing all my rough edits. It depends on what it is. I've been getting more into using the adjustment brush, which is pretty rad, actually. It's pretty cool.
Hmm.
It takes some getting used to. It's certainly not like dodging and burning. It's a little bit more sensitive. But it's really good for the blends if there's stuff I need to desaturate or brighten up in a particular image that I'm going to use in my blend. Um, and then open up in Photoshop, and that's where I do the majority of the color correction, obviously straightening, all the verticals. And I don't think, although I wouldn't want to do it because I'm in Photoshop anyways, I don't think PT Lens is a Lightroom plugin. But I know it's a Photoshop plugin, and I have that. And then I have I have that set on an F key. So I just hit my F4 key, and it automatically corrects for barrel distortion,
Nice.
which is
It
pretty.
is.
Yeah,
It is a Lightroom. You have to set it up.
is it?
You have to set up PT Lens as an external editor. It's not necessarily a plugin, but you can
Okay.
add it to the external editor list. I'm interrupting with silliness, but I know it is.
No, that's
You can right click it eventually and say edit in PT Lens edit. You can do that.
But then it needs to open up PT Lens, do its thing, and then dump it back into Lightroom, right?
It does, and that's the beauty of adding something as an external editor is it will send it back to Lightroom, so you don't have to manually re-import it. Which is, if you're doing something on like a batch, it's a headache if you have to re-import something into Lightroom. So that's the good thing
Right.
about setting it up as an external editor.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Same sort of thing as the plugin. It's really nice. So I have a bunch of F keys set up on my keyboard for things that I consistently do as
Hmm.
well. Certain actions. And go because one big thing, and I'm not. I wanted to say when I was giving that plug for Lightroom 3 and CS5, Adobe is not paying me for any of this. Nor is Nick Software. However. Nick Software is amazing stuff. Vivisa, Define, and then Color Effects Pro. There's a couple filters that they have in Color Effects Pro that I couldn't live without anymore. The white neutralizer, the tonal contrast, and the pro contrast are just awesome machines. Just awesome machines.
I'm gonna have to check them out.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And it's so much better than, like in Lightroom when people say, oh, well, just use the eyedropper tool, for your white balance and click on this. It's like you could be walking around for days trying to get the right spot on that darn thing. I mean, it works okay, but if you hit something that's just slightly gray, then your exposure's all off. It's like it doesn't work for me nearly as well as using the white neutralizer, which just you hit a color and it takes in varying degrees, takes all the color out of what you just hit in the entire image. So like if you have kind of like a yellow cast in a blue room, it'll just wipe the yellow out or wipe the blue out. It rocks.
Yeah, white balance is a science in itself.
It
Getting it
is.
right.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. So I have a merge layer set up on my thing, which is the F2 key. If I have a bunch of layers, just hit F2 and they're all gone. Merge it back into a background, and a couple other things that I do. So that's helpful if people don't know how to set up actions and F keys. It'd be worth checking out.
Definitely.
So then I do all my vertical correction, color balance. I don't really sharpen a whole lot. I don't really worry about that too much. I like the high pass filter for that almost more than the unsharp mask.
Hmm.
And that's about it. I don't know if we'd covered in the. I'm sure we did in the contract blog, but I don't really need to resize anything. I just send the full images over to the agency, and they resize and do whatever they're going to do with them there.
Because they have
I would
people.
definitely have.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they have people the marketing staff to take care of that. So I know folks that have stuff set up for resizing to send it into different folders and whatnot for clients, which makes a whole lot of sense. Um, and then obviously a lot people are out there way more savvy, excuse me, with turning stuff into web galleries for preview for their clients and stuff, which I think is a really really smart idea to do as well. If folks don't know how to do that. But I'm fortunate that I don't have to.
I know.
Yeah. So, is that kind of what you wanted about
Yeah,
the, the
that makes
workflow?
perfect sense. Just wanted to give people an idea of what it was like from the beginning to the end of the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that
Yeah.
does it.
So that's pretty much it.
All right,
Yeah.
let's jump to the photo walkthrough.
Okay.
All right, and
Sure.
basically just tell us about the image that we're talking about. Tell us what was going through your mind, what your compositional intentions were, your lighting. You could even tell us where the lights were. All right, I'll just back out now. Photo one.
Okay. And which you're going to have to remind me. Photo one is the exterior shot.
It is the interior shot with the setting sun. It's more of like an evening shot.
Oh, the night shot. Okay. So let's see. These were taken a number of years ago. So I'm going to try to remember for you what I had done. Um, and I would do things differently these days too. So,
I love it when we start like
nice.
that.
Yeah, right. Well, night shots, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure a number of people have done them, and the first challenge in a night shot is where do you put your lights so that they're not reflected in the windows? I mean, that's the biggest challenge. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
using strobes, and especially if you're shooting even close to the way that I do, which means bouncing it off of something behind you or adjacent to you, it's going to create a horrible, horrible hot spot in the windows. So with this one, I'm pretty sure. I know that I had one on camera, and at this point in the game, I used to point it up and into the room. Um, and so I'm sure I had one on camera up into the room with a wide angle diffuser on it. I'm thinking probably about an eighth or a quarter power. And then I would have had one off to the left and one off to the right. And those days, too, I was much more into pointing strobes into the room than I am these days, which also would have eliminated a lot of the hot spots in the window.
Hmm.
So I'm sure I had one, again, camera left and camera right, pointed crisscrossing each other into the room so that the one light was kind of trying to fill the shadows of the other light so that they didn't become too noticeable or too directional.
Makes sense.
I'm pretty sure off of the fireplace on the right-hand side, I don't think that's an ambient shadow off of the black thing above the couch there. That's a fireplace.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure that's a shadow off of one of the flashes that I had there.
Okay.
But the nice thing about night shots is if you pick the right time of night, you where the ambient and the light outside balance, you can almost be using the flash mainly as supplemental and just rely on the ambient exposure for the actual image itself. Especially, and I don't remember if this place did or not, especially if the lights are on dimmer switches. Now, being the OCD critic that I am about my work, those lights above on that back wall actually are a little bit blown out for my taste. Again, these days I would have handled it differently with stuff that I didn't know back then.
Hmm.
But still, it's not that bad. And I'm sure I was just waiting for the right time of night and the right light, so everything was fairly well balanced. The comp choice on it was an interesting one. This shot was for the architect, who's now actually a very good friend of mine. But it was not for the real estate agent.
Oh.
And he wanted to not only show the volume of the room, but wanted to make sure that the windows, and particularly that isn't really the dining room, that's the breakfast nook, that far room over there. He wanted to show off that and its relationship to the family room and the kitchen. So I think we both kind of chose the comp on this one.
Gotcha.
He had some pretty good input as to what he wanted. And so this one's mainly about, again, the windows, the volume of the ceiling. As you can tell, the ceiling's going up, kind of into a triangle up above, rather than being a flat ceiling. And the window choice, not just that there's windows there, but what types of windows he used, with the aluminum in it, which actually was, man, that stuff was hard to photograph. I don't know if I'm sure people have, but how many people have photographed aluminum windows? But man, those things pick up flashes like nobody's business.
Yeah.
I've had to recreate those time and time again. And then for anyone who's in the Bay Area, if you look, so you look straight into the breakfast nook, the chair that's off to the right of it, there's a window open right there, right above it, the chair with the red pillow on it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's Mount Tam out there. Wanted to make sure that's one of the landmarks of having expensive property, is that you can see Mount Tam from your place.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it's similar. It's all about the view, as I've been told over and over and over again. If you're ever shooting a place with a view, it's all about the view. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I shot one of those today at noon as well.
Yeah.
Which is actually the last thing that I like to hear when people say, "Get the view." I'm like, crap. I don't want to have to do that. So that's that image. And now that I'm looking at it, there are shadows coming off of the wires as well, of the lights that are hanging, those little small bulbs. So I definitely have one left and right working on this one too. So that's that image. This was actually one of my favorite shoots that I did in the beginning. The property, I think, was 6,000 square feet. And for, to talk about the insanity of some of the work that I do, and actually this is actually a very interesting image for a number of reasons, and why I don't want to worry about converting RAW to JPEG, is I had 2 hours to shoot 6,000 square feet and to make 35 images, and I pulled it off. Not this night shoot. We came back for the night shoot. But this shot was actually for the real estate agent, David, that got me the job at Pacific Union. And this, at the time, was the most expensive property ever listed in Oakland, California. It was going for $4.7 million.
Not bad.
Yeah. So
this was kind of a landmark shoot in more than one way.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I did a lot of details on this one because, again, I was working pretty closely with Phil, the architect, Phil Perkins. And he'd be like, "Ooh, I want this cool little detail, and I want to show this off," which was great and refreshing, to not have to show, the volume of the room or, make it look big. He was more like, make it look cool. I don't care if it looks big. I just want it to look cool.
Yeah.
So there's a number of these shots that are still in my portfolio and still would be in my portfolio. So.
All right, let's talk about photo number 2, which is the dining room, kitchen area. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Completely different tonality. I just flip from one to the other. Totally different tone.
Yeah. This one, although this one is similar in terms of concept, or in execution, anyways. And one thing that I told my students at the workshop is you want to eke out every single photon of available light that you can out of a photo. If you don't need to see something, blow the window out. One of the things that I saw, time and time again, I haven't been on Flickr as much as, back in the day, but that people were pulling in views that made absolutely no sense. Like, they're pulling in the neighbor's wooden fence. It's like, why? And you got 4 stops of ambient light right there that you could use. Now, of course, you don't want to blow out that, like the beautiful chandelier that's there or the lamp. But if I'm not blowing those lights out, I'm going to pull in every bit of ambient light that I can. And something that you mentioned, but before we started the interview, you still can see the green out there. You know that there's bushes. It's not a drop dead view of Mount Tam. We got the green. And then additionally is something that people don't think about all that often is what don't you want to see out the windows?
Right.
Not what do you want to see, but also what don't you want to see. And in the left-hand window above the lamp there is the rest of the house, and I don't want to see that. I want to get rid of that as much as possible. So you can tell, I mean, it's pretty well blown out. You can kind of tell it's a door there, but you can't see the side of the house at all.
Now, for me, because I look at so many of these things, it doesn't distract me. I wonder if it distracts people who, oh, I wonder what's out there,
I don't know why it would. And then if you pulled it in, it'd be like, well, why are you showing
I know. There's you can't win.
No. So this is my favorite recipe for a photograph is, like, let's say 2/3 part ambient, 1/3 flash. That's used to fill in a little bit, but mostly used to help with the color balance of it. I mean, if you shoot straight ambient, except under more severe circumstances, you're going to have color shifts. If it's a detail, you can get away with it a lot easier, but going to have some pretty severe color shifts across the plane of the photo that are going to be kind of hard to deal with in post. So even when I'm shooting mostly ambient, I'm using flash to help with the color balance on it. So I know, again, this was back when I was shooting with one on camera, so I would say that was pointed up and to the left. And then I know that I had one light camera left bounced into a wall or a cabinet. And then if I remember correctly too, and I used to do this a lot and I don't really do it anymore, is there would have been one behind the island in the kitchen, probably right underneath the flowers. Very low power, 1/128th, probably a wide-angle diffuser pointed towards the stove that you can't see because the flowers are obscuring it a little bit. I might have had two behind that island pointed to light up underneath there. And then probably one, there's a butcher block there, and there's a light above it. Probably one to the right of that against the wall, pointed into the kitchen. Wide-angle diffuser, again, super low power, probably like 1/128th, maybe 1/164th, but no higher than that. But again, it's mostly an ambient shot. And this is another thing that I said at the workshop. People say, oh, you have all these flashes. That means that you can, light the world now. And I don't think about flash that way. I mean, I do that when I have to. But the last thing that I want is an over-flashed photo. I hate the looks of an over-flashed photo. Almost more than I dislike a really bad HDR. For some reason, I don't know.
You put some thought into this.
Yeah, I have, actually.
About which you hate more.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you need to know that in life. It's not what you like, it's what you hate. But for me, the flash units, again, people would say, oh my God, you got 9 of them. I'm like, yeah, but I use 6 of them on 1/164th. I don't have 9 flashes on full power. I mean, why and what would you do with it? I mean, it's the use of multiple flashes is going to be accenting things and sculpting light to get it to where you want it to be, not to blast the crap out of something so that it's necessarily monotone, or looks overflashed. So
I like the accent. I like the way you put that. It definitely accents things.
Yeah, that's what it's about. And that's why knowing what each flash does is, well, let me rephrase that. What a flash can do. You have, I call it bare bulb. Technically, it's not bare bulb. I've gotten crap for that before, but no real medium on the actual flash itself on the speed light, and then you have the wide angle diffuser that flips down, and then you have the Stoffen cap that goes over that, and then you have the flash being directly pointed into the room, and then you have flash being bounced off of something. Each of those and all of their myriad combinations produces a different quality of light, and that's what I do when I teach people, is try to get them to understand, it may not be the placement of your flash that's incorrect, it's the quality of the flash that's incorrect. If you only put on a Stoffen cap, it would work, or if you only took it off, it would work, or if you only pointed it in the opposite direction from what you thought you might need to do, then you're going to get the quality of light that you're looking for. And there's small changes. I mean, in the workshops, I would tell people, you want to think about turning the head of the flash about 1/4 of an inch. And no more than that. You don't want to turn it all the way to the left, if it's bright on the left side of the photo, or all the way to the right if it's, bright on the right side. You don't. It's important not to think that way. Think about small little incremental movements and small little changes. And generally that will solve the problem in photos more than really torquing on stuff or cranking up the power.
Excellent points. Excellent points.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Photo 3 and the final one, which is an exterior, and I think
Yep.
it's the splash screen, or the first photo you see when you go to your site.
Yep, sure is. So we were talking about this one a little bit prior to. Excuse me. I sort of have to laugh because something that I've told real estate agents before, and I try to convince them to do this actually too. I tell them that I have a lot of skill, and I probably will be able to get a better exterior shot than they do. However, a monkey with a camera on a good day with the sunlight in the right position is going to take something pretty darn close to what I take. It's not going to be a huge difference. I mean, you're not paying me to take the exterior shot. I mean, you're paying me for everything that I do inside, and if you call me out at the wrong time of day, it's to your disadvantage. So why don't you carry a camera with you and take it at the right time of day, and it'll be way better than my photo at the wrong time of day. Mm-hmm. However, with that being said, there's certain things, because this one I look at it and I was like, well, I was lucky. But I needed to be able to respond to the situation in a way that made it not so lucky. In the Bay Area, the bay will be the clearest on the day after a rain. So I think one thing that, especially if you are thinking about doing night exterior shots, like the one below, I needed to plan that really carefully about when to take it. The window wasn't very wide for me. I probably had like 10 or 15 minutes, but I sat there for 45 minutes waiting for the light to change. Same thing with night exteriors. You need to be in the right place, know what time of year it is, know when the sun sets, what's the orientation of the sun. With this, it was the same thing, is that Saturday night, it rained, cats and dogs. I woke up Sunday morning, and the sun was shining with all these clouds. And I was like, you know what? It's going to be killer up on Gravatt today. This is 9 in the morning, which is the best time for a view here, if it's going to be clear. So, and at that point, I wasn't in a relationship. All I was doing was working. So I had the time, jumped in my car, ran up there. But a couple days before, I had gone and talked to the neighbors on the property below this one saying, I'm going to be taking photos of this. Is it okay if I'm on your property? And, where can I stand? I don't want to, upset you. And I'm going to come back multiple times. Is it all right if I just show up, if it's a good day? So I did all the prep work in terms of having the position for the shot. I was just waiting for the right time of day. And I knew my environment well enough so that when I woke up, I could say, it's going to be killer out there. And so I could get that quote-unquote lucky shot by having all of that, prep work done and the knowledge of my environment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like it paid off.
Yeah, this one's spectacular. This is just, I love this photo. I really, really love this photo. Some people say though that this place kind of looks like, you want to have vats of boiling oil, to fend off the Huns that are going to be running up the hill on it.
Oh man.
So, but yeah, this was one of my favorite photos, and yeah, I knew when it needed to be taken and what needed to be done. So that's that.
All right.
Huh.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much the end of the interview. I would like to ask you. Well, I asked you last time what else you photograph. So if anyone wants to know, they can go back to the other contract podcast and listen to that. But I end every interview with this question: what
Okay.
advice would you give somebody getting started in real estate photography?
Hmm. I'm sure that this question is answered like just so many different ways, and I'm sure that most of it is dependent upon, um, I don't know what. I keep thinking about what I would have done differently 6 years ago. So again, I'm going to go to, and I'll put it in a little bit more personal of a way. I think what's really important for people to understand, and I think this is important in any business, but real estate photography it can be a pretty heavy burnout. Photography in general is a very heavy burnout job. I think the average life of a photographer is about 4.5 years. In all areas of photography, not real estate photography. So I think people need to understand what their limits are. What can you do in a day? How many hours do you want to dedicate to the business? Because if you don't, it can turn into an 18-hour-a-day job. I'm not saying, say, oh, I only want to work 4 hours, because you ain't going to get it to fly that way. But, if your limit is 10 hours, keep it at 10 hours. Or if your limit is 8 hours, keep it at 8 hours. And develop a streamlined system of managing the business that's going to accommodate whatever those limits are, which means when are you going to do your scheduling? How are you going to get your orders? How are you going to take care of your marketing pieces? And when we were talking about workflow, for me, again, JPEG is the solution because it cuts off a tremendous amount of time for me. So that's a part of my equation in keeping it manageable, or as manageable as I can. And so I think that first off, you're going to need to know your limits. Secondly, you're going to need to know how much you want to get paid for it. And you're going to need to start a little bit lower than what your ultimate goal is, but know what your ultimate goal is. Know what a minimum requirement for a shoot not only is right now, but maybe 2 or 3 years down the line. Now, folks may not know this, but you want to be thinking ahead so that, again, you're not giving everything away for free in the beginning, and it's impossible to then raise your rates.
Of course.
I also think education is extremely important. So, probably a lot of people starting out these days are way more savvy at Photoshop than I will ever be. But, like NAP is a great resource. Obviously Larry's blog and, real estate, for photography and all of that's really, really good. And I would also... So, I mean, there's a couple areas for inspiration. Again, like people can go on, PFRE and look at folks' work and say, oh, I'm inspired, to achieve photographs of this level by, like, let's say M. James or something like that, who's a fantastic shooter, or Aaron or somebody. And be looking at their work, and M. James is great at telling folks how he does this stuff. So you can kind of, take that material, and work it into your workflow. But I would also encourage people to start looking outside of the real estate world. Pick up shelter magazines, and not so much Dwell per se, because Dwell is really selling a lifestyle. It's not really photography of building. It's more like photography of buildings with people in it that's kind of touting a prefab lifestyle. Great magazine, don't get me wrong, but I'd be looking more to like Veranda or not even necessarily AD because they've certainly had some schlock in there recently. But anyways, so that you're kind of like thinking for real estate, but you're thinking beyond real estate. And hopefully you'll be able to incorporate that in your real estate work as well, and then start to think about where it may take you in the future, if that is somewhere you want to go. Because it can be a pretty insular world, and the shooting can get redundant after a while. I mean, after a while, a bedroom's a bedroom. There's nothing you're going to do about that. So having inspiration outside of our particular field, I think, is really important. And probably the biggest advice I would give people is start out slow. You do not want to start this business thinking thinking that you know how to use 6 flashes, even if you have all the money in the world, and can go out and buy a brand new D3S with a 14-24 with a bunch of SB900s. If you don't know how to use those suckers, you're just going to like buy a new Ferrari. You're just going to crash into a tree. Start where you're at, and then start adding on slowly. If you're only familiar with one on camera flash, start there. You'll know when you need another flash by going to, showing your work on PFRE and reading stuff. I mean, for years, Tira did the best work with one on camera flash. She was the woman to go to for one camera flash. And on top of it, you need to know that when you're in a pinch. So start slowly, and you'll get better. And, the agents that hire you in the beginning are hiring you for your business sense, your personality, and your work, not just the work that you do. There's a lot more that goes into it than just the photography. And then you'll just grow, and hopefully grow your business that way. But it'll be a disaster if you try to start too quickly. Just a disaster. So that would be my advice.
Hey, I mean, there's so much you just gave right there, and I'm not even going to go into it, but I agree. I feel like I could say something about everything you just said. I agree 100% with everything you just said. No more than that. That's all I need to say.
Okay. All right. That's good.
Well, if you can hear, there's a thunderstorm going on here right now. I don't know if anyone can hear that. It's been a heat wave here in the East Coast for, 6 days straight, 7 days, and we're finally getting some rain. So it's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah. Oh, hey, one thing I want to throw in as well is, I'm really, busy with everything that I'm doing, and I guess in general I'm not all that great at keeping up with emails. But the last interview that we did together, I actually had someone make an inquiry because of the interview, and he's someone that I'm training right now to help me out with my business here in Oakland. So it was a good, really good contact that I made from it. So thank you, Mike.
No problem.
And if people want to get a hold of me after the podcast, to talk about stuff, I'm more than happy to do that too. Again, if I have the time and stuff, but it doesn't have to end here necessarily. So,
great point.
Yep.
All right. Well, no, you're welcome, and you're welcome to whoever you're training.
Oh yeah, he's a good guy. So
good. All right. Well, thanks, Thomas. You have a good one, and enjoy the evening.
Okay, enjoy your thunderstorm. I miss those.
Finally have one.
Good.
Thanks.
Okay, Mike. Bye.